Okay, and we are live. All great speakers start off by saying how happy they are to be with the audience. Well, I would like to start off by saying how happy I am to be here with you today. Thank you so much. Today, I would like to discuss some of the fundamentals of growing, and then we're going to follow up with a question and answer session. So, any questions that you would like to put into the comments, feel free to do so, and then we can discuss those at the end. That'd be very fun. So, why grow? Well, that's kind of a simple question with a very complicated answer, but to sum it all up, as the old proverb says, if you want something done right, you have to do it yourself. Well, I've had the privilege of working in hydroponic stores for years, garden centers, done organic gardening, worked in greenhouses, out in the field, done some pretty large scale commercial agriculture as well. So I'm coming at it from a multifaceted perspective. Horticulture and planting and um, plant husbandry in general is a very therapeutic and wonderful lifestyle. And the more that you study, the more your skills translate and compound over to other crops. And there's a lot of subtle differences between plants, but also so many similarities. So, by using integrated pest management and best management practices, you will learn and that you can ensure a clean product and nutrient dense, healthy food for yourself, for your own body, and for your family. So, you should grow your own because it will also increase your knowledge of plants that you can apply to other areas of your life, like your landscape and garden. And we'll discuss this in several different broader topics. Um, let's start with air movement and temperature. So, the single most important thing for growing is proper ventilation, air movement, and temperature. So, air intakes are vital. Obviously, you want to try and have that cleaned and scrubbed if possible to prevent any infestations from outside. And also, carbon filter and exhausting outside is really critical. Also, horizontal airflow fans. So, fresh cold air pumping into your oh, whoops cool air pumping into your room will ensure that your humidity and temperature stays in check. And whether that's with an AC or fresh air intake or combination of the both, um, ideally that's going to be very important. An excess buildup of humidity can cause funguses like powdery mildew or fungi like powdery mildew and bud rot to establish, and excess of heat will stress out the plants and can leave them susceptible to insect infestations like spider mites and others. So, horticultural grade indoor lights can be very hot, and that's something that you want to deal with. You can hang the carbon filter on the ceiling, so your exhaust air is also pulling from that heat pocket. That can be really important. Or you can, of course, just have it on the floor. Carbon filters are a grower's best friend. When properly installed, carbon filters keeps the air fresh and circulating, and it can eliminate any type of stench and odors. And this is very helpful, also very respectful and safe for the neighbors and whatnot. The size of the carbon filter and fan depends largely on the room. So uh, that's something that you're going to want to talk with someone at your local store and basically look at a few charts and calculate the volume of your room depending on if you want to scrub it, meaning you're running it continuously in the room freestanding, or if you want to exhaust it. And that means you have it hooked up to the outside and you're actually kind of creating a negative pressure, typically with the room, a slight negative pressure, and exhausting it outside. So, horizontal airflow is necessary to keep humidity from building up around your plants as a result of transpiration. So, they're just naturally putting off a lot of water and a lot of transpiration. So, that's actually very important to keep them keep the fresh air moving in. This is easily accomplished with a few 16-inch fans that can be purchased very easily. Box fans work, but you need more than one for a relatively small space. You want to use as many fans as necessary to keep the plant leaflets moving, but not the structural stems. So basically, you want uh, direct wind where the structural stems can be seen moving back and forth is usually too much and can cause damage, um, or basically windburn. And one very good way to avoid this is by mounting the fans on the ceiling or oscillating fans that are on stands. Also work excellent. And the key is to keep the air moving around the crop and around the whole room. So fresh air in and that humid, kind of dank air out will prevent disease and keep your temperature in check. Also, a lot of folks using dehumidifiers and things of that nature. So, moving on, genetics is incredibly important, and that is also a main focus these days by so many people, which is really cool to see that getting to the forefront of the industry. So, it's always been that way, but it's just more and more so now. Folks are extremely focused on it, which is awesome. So, you could have a perfect grow room, but without proper genetics, you will probably end up with a poor quality product. So genetics is at least 50% of the equation, and the other 50% lies in kind of the grow room and the environmental setup. And encompassed with that, I would also say pruning and structural training is would be included in that. So the best way to obtain solid genetics is by obtaining a rooted cutting from a reputable source. But beware of pests on these young plants, because the number one way that pests get established in the grow room is by cross contamination from an infested room. So remember your quarantine periods. Remember scoping everything with a magnifying with a really good microscope so that you can see all the way down to your aerophoid mites, and then quarantining until the plant gets pretty large. You will typically catch any type of fungi and things of that nature. Use integrated pest management and best management practices to ensure cleanliness of the baby plants. Now let's talk about cloning, because cloning is so vitally important. The beginning is the most important part of the enterprise, and a strong, vigorous clone is necessary for a strong, vigorous plant. So this means developing a root system fast and getting the plant established properly. Cloning is one area that many growers struggle, so follow these couple of tips to be successful. Number one, I like to use aeroponic cloners. That's just a preference because I believe they establish faster and end up with a larger root system. So when you go to transplant them, there's no transplant shock, and they end up already like really ready to go, kind of ready to jump off. A, a clean, free of pests, healthy clone must be taken from a clean, healthy mother plant. So this mother plant should be kept to avoid light stress and minimize any stressors. So the healthier your mother plant, the healthier the clones are going to be. There's an exact correlation there. And take your cuttings, de-leaf the cuttings at the base, leaving only the last several nodes. And you want to cut the remaining larger leaves in half. This is done because it will increase the amount of energy that goes directly into the roots rather than photosynthesis. So you're culturally telling the plant where to move that energy. And then, of course, you can also do seedlings and seeds, and you get that great vigorous growth from the seeds as well. And as I said, so many people focusing on genetics and seed saving and breeding, that's also an extremely good way to go. I just think that it's really nice to have a established library of clones and mother plants so that you have that definite 100% reliable aspect of your grow, and then you can experiment with seeds as you get to find more and more reliable seeds. That's fantastic. You can keep going back to those people, and that's why all the breeders are kind of exploding now, and the good ones are really taking off, even astronomically faster, because those reputations really precede themselves. Um, okay, so then there's also how are you going to grow? So your media. So you've got soil, cocoa, hydroponics, aeroponics, uh, so many different ways to go, so many different ways to skin a cat, so to speak. You really have to choose and experiment and end up doing what works for you and your schedule and your time frame and things of that nature. So let's just take soil for example. First of all, it is pronounced soil, not dirt. I hate to be a snob about that, but dirt is something that you kind of find out in your front yard, kicking around. Cannabis is grown in soil, uh, usually has an extremely nice taste, smell, and effect because it does have a lot of trace nutrients and micronutrients that the plant's able to draw on, and that translates over into a lot of terpene production and secondary metabolites. They also need to be watered in different respects. So I think that's one of the most important things. When you're talking about watering for soil, the golden rule is not to overwater. So overwatering is a common problem in grow rooms, especially in soil gardens, and it can lead to decreased yield and increased insect infestations such as fungus gnats and other really non-ideal root-borne insects. So the plant should be completely dried down before every watering when you're in soil. And to check that all the water has been used, you want to physically lift up the plants. And if the plant is light and easy to lift or tilt up, then you're ready to water again. And if it's fully saturated and really heavy, well, you can feel that difference. So you want to know that difference and be prepared to feel that and physically actually check the amount of moisture in the container, because the top of the plant can dry out and it can appear dry, but the fact is there's still a significant amount of moisture in the bottom half of the container, and that actually can cause some real problems if you don't let that dry out in soil. Now, in cocoa, it's kind of the opposite, where you actually want to make sure that that bottom half almost stays saturated, because a cocoa plant grows more of a hydroponic style root system. So it's basically uh, wanting that higher concentration of water more regularly, more of a tap root that's absorbing a lot of water. And if those dry out, they can actually be sensitive and it can lead to a decrease in yield. So there's a big difference there when you're in a soil garden or a cocoa garden. That's a big misconception. That's another reason why people will do cocoa for a lot of drip systems if they run their drip systems on the heavier side. Typically cocoa is going to respond a lot better with that. Cocoa, even when it's fully saturated, holds about 16% oxygen and or air. So there's plenty of oxygen in that rhizosphere. And oxygen is so important for the plant's natural defenses and their ability to fight off pest and disease, the oxygen to the roots. Um, and then there's also hydroponics, aeroponics, some more advanced techniques where you don't have the same buffering capacity of the microbes in the rhizosphere that you have with soil and cocoa. So you have to be adjusting the pH yourself. Make sure that the pH is dialed, make sure that your nutrients are dialed, and essentially it's a very, very productive way of growing. Um, but then when you use some really beneficial amendments like some of the products from Greece, you can get the best of both worlds where you're really amping up your quality, and then you get the yield that hydroponics offers and the crop steering that of that nature of growing. So that's kind of the best of both worlds. You want to use a reservoir depending on how many gallons or depending on how many plants you have, the size of the reservoir, to hold the water and mix the nutrients. To ensure accurate mixing, you should mark the sides of the reservoir at every 5 gallons so you know exactly what you're working with. Uh, you want to get a low voltage air pump with at least two outputs and connect that air tubing long enough to reach into the reservoir. Put some air stones on the end and use this to these air tubes to aerate your water and bubble the reservoir the day before you need the water. And this aeration will prevent anaerobic bacteria from building up and will eliminate harmful chemicals from the water, and will also infuse more oxygen and air into the water, that the plants really like. Like we discussed, the roots need that dissolved oxygen to be able to defend themselves and have a really nice immune system and actually survive out there. So you also want to use a pump coming out of the reservoir, and this is just an example for like a medium-sized grow. You would use a maybe a 6 horsepower or about a 1200 gallon per hour pump, and get a hose long enough to reach from the water source into your grow room comfortably, and get a nice wand from your local hydroponic store or garden supply store. And it is definitely worth it to pay a little bit more for the brass attachments that hold up better, because you're going to be watering frequently and precisely. So this is not an area to really skimp. And then with your nutrients. Well, nutrients are broken down by microbes and fed directly into the root system in a complex relationship. A lot of the products in Greece will supplement not only the nutrients, but the complex biology that you need to break down those nutrients and make them steadily and readily available to the plant. So it's an excellent complement to what you're already doing with your bases. So your plants need food. The plant stores a lot of carbohydrates in the root system so that they can later draw on that energy reserve when it comes time to flower and produce big buds. So bigger roots equals bigger shoots equals bigger buds, right? The level of nutrients depends on the stage of growth and development. So let me break it down for you. There's mother plants, like we discussed. That's going to be a larger, kind of slower growing. You're trying to get more sustainable growth on that plant. I'll give you an extreme pro tip where a lot of times people are always topping, trimming back their mother plants. Well, a really good idea is to top it, or take, your cuttings, trim it down a little bit, and then on the next time after it's regrown a bit, actually take the plant out of the container and trim the roots on the bottom and replant it, and alternate back and forth between trimming the top of the plant and trimming the roots. Top, roots, top, roots. that will take your mother plants and be able to keep them small and compact, but also it will uh, balance the hormones so that the plant doesn't get uh, hormonally imbalanced and then cause genetic drift and things of that nature. So there's also the transplant phase, like we just discussed. There's the early transition from the aeroponic cloner or from your rooting plug into the soil or into your cocoa media, and that needs to be a very smooth one. The proper nutrients are essential to make this happen. So immediately after you plant the clone in the media, you want to water it in. You do this gently, and you also do it very slowly so that you don't damage the new roots. And that's a very important phase, that transition phase. And then, of course, you have your grow and your bloom nutrition. A lot of folks will run their grow nutrients up through the first 2 weeks of flower because to accommodate that stretch period, and then they'll transition over to bloom. But everyone's a little bit different on that. Light is extremely important. So there's been a big transition of lighting over the past several years, moving more towards LEDs. Traditionally, it was definitely T5s, metal halides, and high pressure sodium. And now it's almost exclusively LEDs and hybrid lighting systems. And this is incredible because, for example, high pressure sodium was about 10% efficient to the crop, 90% inefficient in the sense that it was mostly heat created by the bulb. And growers had to do a lot of different control aspects to deal with offsetting that heat load. Now LEDs are up to 80% efficient to the crop. So you're talking a huge, massive increase in efficiency. So that needs to be taken into consideration when you're doing your plant heights. Your lighting heights, and just the light requirements of the individual plants. Another thing to consider is you probably want to run your vegetative lights for 18 hours. Previously, we ran them for 24 hours, but with the amount of UV coming off of the LEDs and the increase in efficiency, it can almost overdrive the plant to run them 24 hours in veg. So that's a consideration there. Pest management is extremely important. So integrated pest management and best management practices. Grease really stresses this because our products are so complementary to your, not only to boosting your potency and your yield, but also the integrated pest management and the overall defense of the plant. There's so many insects out there that are trying to attack the crop, and let's list off a few. Spider mites, fungus gnats, phylloxera or root aphids, white flies, thrips, airfoid mites like russet mites, broad mites, and others have kind of come on more recently in the past couple years. And then we have funguses and bacteria, powdery mildew, bud rot, dampening off of seedlings. So these are all things that you want to prevent against, and just more reasons to use your quality amendments like grease, because those trace minerals and that good biology is going to lead to your immune system and your immune support and a hardier plant. And a hardy plant is a strong plant that can deal with oxidative stress, deal with pest infestations, high light, cold, high heat, all types of stressful situations. Pruning is very important. Pruning, you're also causing damage. You want to use a product like blue grease when you're doing cuttings or pruning, because what it'll do is it'll go to that site of oxidative stress that you cause when you cause an open wound. So that will help quite a bit. And then uh, you want to also do some pruning depending on the variety and depending on your situation. A lot of people will like to do a topping after 5 nodes. A lot of people will grow even untopped plants. The big difference is how much space do you have and how many plants are you growing. And all of this will come in time in growing those plants out and the experience that you glean from taking that to fruition, seeing the growth patterns, the growth characteristics, what you might want to change for next time. Maybe you say, oh, this plant would probably benefit from a topping or do better. So that's part of the evolution of understanding a crop and truly really getting in tune with that specific genetic and even phenotype in a lot of respects. So you also want to do some nice cultural pruning and pruning up of the canopy through the vegetative phase. So as the plant grows and those lower leaves are not getting as much light, it's a good idea to take them off and take those node sites off to increase the airflow. And you'd be amazed how important it is to minimize that amount of bud sites, because if you think about it, it's just like a fruit tree. There'll be tons of blossoms all over the tree. Well, they go in and they pick off the fruits so that there's not as many, there's just a few on the limb. And those will be much bigger, larger fruits because all the energy will go into those instead of a bunch of tiny fruits all up the stem. So that's extremely important. Also pretty strain dependent. Some plants respond a little bit better to that than others. Also, for example, when you're outdoors or when you have a lot more light intensity, you can leave a little bit more of that on. It's very, very situationally dependent. And then let's go through and talk about some questions and answers. And let's just see if we can't just burn through these batteries on these devices as best we can. So let's look through here. See if I missed any questions real quick. All right. Y'all need to ask some questions. Let's see. Nice. Well, I appreciate you. I've got a list here, and then please feel free to put any question you have in the comments, and we can talk about it. So, for one, cannabis is an extremely highly evolved plant, and I have some examples and some proof for that. They are looking at the nitrogen fixing bacteria inside various species, and it turns out that the cannabis plant has the most highly evolved, most powerful structures for harvesting nitrogen out of the atmosphere, and that is the glandular trichomes. And being such a highly evolved plant, it realized, okay, I'm going to put these structures all over my buds, not only to protect them, but also to be able to absorb a lot of energy and create a ton of seeds in a very short amount of time. So the way the plant is doing that is it's pulling these beneficial bacteria up out of the soil, and it's actually selecting them in the roots, doing a pre-selection, and then it's moving the microbes all throughout the plant. And it's so smart, it's actually able to move certain communities to certain parts of the plant that are most ideal. And the glandular trichomes are one of those structures. they're actually one of the most advanced, most highly evolved structures. One of the best at doing this, at pulling this nitrogen right out of the atmosphere. Because the atmosphere is something like 78% nitrogen just naturally. But the problem is it's really strongly bonded. It's actually triple bonded. So that makes it an inert gas. It's basically unreactive. It's hard to break that bond. So what the bacteria have done is they've evolved an enzyme that will break that bond. And the plants are not able to produce this enzyme. Instead, what they do is they capture the bacteria. It's so cool. Bacteria, they start out in a rod-shaped form typically, like a like a almost like a potato, and then the plants dissolve the outside of the cell wall, and it turns into what's called an L form, and they're actually basically become kind of a spherical blob at that point, and it's actually easier for the plant to replicate them and move them around inside the plant, and it's also less likely that the bacteria is going to overgrow the system and overtake the plant. So the reason why the plant needs oxygen, like we were stressing the oxygen in your water and to the roots, and the airflow to the plant as well above ground. The reason the plant needs oxygen so much is so that it can defend itself against this bacteria overwhelming overwhelming the system. It needs the oxygen to be able to control the bacteria and keep dissolving it and basically pulling the nitrogen off of the bacteria. So this is another way that plants are able to get nutrients. So we're obviously feeding them nutrients, but this is just another way that the plants are able to absorb a lot of nutrients, mostly nitrogen, in a very quick fashion. And it's doing this throughout the plant. It's doing it in the roots, in the stems and leaves, in the filamentous hairs, so in just your non-glandular trichomes and just the normal hairs on the plant. That's why you can rub the stem of a tomato, a very, very hairy stem, and you'll still get those terpenes and those smells. It's because you're breaking and liberating a lot of the terpenes that are in those filamentous hairs. So the glandular trichome is actually the best, most highly evolved structure to pull the nitrogen out. That's what makes the plant so special. That's what makes it able to grow so quickly as well. But just to give you an idea, this same bacteria is also inside cactus thorns and cactus spines. And even the thorns of a rose, for example. Because if you think about it, it's the perfect aerial structure, so it's got connection to the nitrogen, but it's excluded from oxygen. So it's tight inside that thorn. And same thing with the glandular trichomes. They're able to be a little bioreactor, and the bacteria is up in the glandular head, and the terpenes, what they're doing is they're actually pulling the oxygen out of the trichome heads. That's why as the plants mature and those trichome heads get bigger and bigger and more of them, they're completely full and saturated with bacteria. The plant is producing a lot of oxygen to control them. And as a result, to keep the process going, oxygen will actually shut down the enzyme that breaks the triple bonded nitrogen and makes the nitrogen available. So the plant is producing the terpenes and the cannabinoids to actually scavenge the extra oxygen in the glandular head. And that's why the smell is coming off and coming off more and more and more towards the end, because the plant is cultivating all this bacteria in the heads, thinking that it's going to get fertilized. So if the plant gets fertilized, all of a sudden it has to produce a ton of nitrogen and a ton of energy right up there to produce all those seeds. Now, obviously, we're not letting our plants get fertilized in many situations and many circumstances. But for all the breeders out there and for everyone that has experienced this, isn't it remarkable how quickly the plant can make a fully formed seed? This is why. It's because the plant is able to pull that extra nutrition that it needs right out of the air and into that amazing aerial structure of the glandular trichomes. Um, root, Trees are doing the same thing out in nature. They're doing it mostly in their roots, and they're also able to take in these nitrogen fixing microbes and cultivate them in their roots for 2 to 3 days, and then they actually push them back out into the soil. So they're pulling that nitrogen off of them, and then they're actually pushing them back out into the soil. The bacteria will reform their cell walls. They'll go back into that potato shaped form, and when they do, they'll actually also absorb a lot of metals and extra elements from the soil so that the next time they're taken in by the plant, when the plant dissolves that cell wall, it also gets not just the nitrogen from the cell wall, it gets those additional minerals. And this is another huge way that the plant is actually able to mine resources out of the soil, out of your cocoa, out of even a hydroponic media, and is able to get that nutrition. So the cool thing is grease is helping with this process all along, because if you look at our bloom product, we're actually taking the buds themselves and fermenting them down. So we're actually capturing this exact bacteria. So that is an amazing product. The grow product, same thing, where a lot of these microbes are in the living shoots of the plants. And in our grow product, we take the entire plant, ferment that all down in the grow phase, in that vigorous growth phase, and are able to harness a lot of those microbes as well as the beneficial compounds from that vigorous growth. And when you apply them back onto your crop, it just thrives. So microbes equals immunity and equals your immune system. It's the same thing with us and our gut. So the more diversity of foods that you eat, the healthier you eat, the better your gut health is, the healthier you are. It's the same thing for the plants. That's why feeding them a very sterile diet grows a very shallow, very hollow product. What you want to do is you want to give them a lot of these secondary micronutrients and trace elements that's going to allow the plant to create all the immune support compounds that it needs to defend itself, as well as giving it the good microbes and good immune support coming from all those microbes that are able to break up the nutrition, spoon feed the nutrition to the plant, and then also the plant is literally eating the microbes themselves. So it's a beautiful kind of relationship there. The cool thing is you would think, oh, this is really bad for the microbes. Well, it's actually the contrary. The plant is what is the plant ultimately doing? The plant is making a bunch of sugars from photosynthesis. This is what it's doing with the sugars. It's actually feeding the bacteria these sugars and replicating them within their systems, within the roots, within these glandular trichomes, and all throughout the plant. And that is why the plant is producing the sugar and pumping so much of it down to the roots. That's also why your sugar products work so well, because it supplements that system, is an instant, quick, available carbohydrate source. You can't overdo it, but that's another reason why our super grease and our grow and our bloom are stabilized with molasses, because they absolutely benefit and wake up from that extra sugar, as long as it's not too much to overwhelm the system. Now, when you are when you are growing your crops out in your garden, using all these products like, for example, the bison brew and the OG grease, they really are loaded with trace elements, and in the aspect of the bison brew, all the associated biology as well to go with those trace elements and make them bioavailable. So when you use that stuff out on your garden, it makes and grows the healthiest food. The reason is it grows more nutrient dense food for you, because what will happen is those trace elements, they will actually get bonded with carbon inside the fruits, for example, inside the tomato or inside the lettuce or whatever you're growing. And all of a sudden, once it's bonded to a carbon, then it's bioavailable for us. So if you use the bison brew, the OG grease, the grow, the bloom, any of our products that are just loaded with those trace elements, you are really going to see the benefit in your garden and in your home flowers, anything like that that where you're actually eating it and seeing the benefit from the nutrition as well. Now, let's see here. We got some good questions rolling in. Is there a way to extend the life of the bacteria? Yes. Once it's in a endospore form, it's very stable. So we use sugar to supersaturate our microbes, and that will typically keep them in stasis for an extremely long time. It says, can I take some steamed rice and drop some of the microbes I purchased onto it and cultivate some more myself? Yeah, you definitely can. And we highly encourage that. Either brewing the bison compost, and our products are Grow and Bloom as well. We have a nice brew feed chart on our website, a compost tea recommendation that actually uses many of our products. And you can also make an indoor IMO with the bison. Now, I've done this successfully where you can do it outside, of course. You can sprinkle down the bison and do the steamed rice on top of the bison outdoors in a normal environment where you're culturing your IMO. To add a little extra microbial inoculation. Or you can even do it indoors. I've done it in a 5-gallon bucket. You fill it 2/3 of the way with wood chips, and then you put a thin layer of the bison brew, about a inch or so, on top of the wood chips. Put your rice cake on top of that, and then, well, I'm sorry. Before you put the rice cake down, I water it with about 2 cups of water to as an additional activation and some humidity in there. And then I'll put the rice cake down and put a lid on it, just askew, so it allows for some airflow. You come back to that cake, it's completely colonized with the streptomyces. All the good microbes will jump up out of that bison into your rice, and then you can take that rice cake, mix it with brown sugar and stabilize it. And then, to your point, how long will the bacteria be stable? Well, once it's in that supersaturation, for an extremely long time. So that's really cool. And literally, the microbes don't get more wild or indigenous than the ones that come from the bison, because the power of the bison, they forage over such a large area, and they have for so many years in history. They're a migratory species, so they've literally collected all the best microbes from the entire country and internalized them, so that when you take that bison brew and you top dress it onto your plant, or even better, if you brew it or do the IMO with it, you're going to really, really maximize that biology. And then what we're proving is the better microbes that you lay down to the plant, the stronger the microbes, the harder the plant has to work to control them, and that makes a more hardy plant. And the hardier, stronger plants produce way more compounds. All your secondary metabolites and all of the 300, 400 compounds that the plant can produce, and many of those compounds are where all your quality comes from. Terpenes, esters, polyphenols, um, the list just goes on, cannabinoids, and all the important stuff that we're really growing for. And yes, if you eat bison meat, it's extremely good for you too. It actually has a form of iron called heme iron, Heme, and that is like the best form of iron for you for your oxygen carrying capacity. So that's great stuff. And then, believe it or not, that translates into the compost as well. It's very high in iron, and that's kind of an overlooked uh, micronutrient that some people are deficient in. And with the bison being an organic source, it's a really nice organic source of iron, calcium, magnesium, silicon, and then, like I said, and I'm stressing, all the associated biology too. So that's just super exciting that you're able to not only have the micronutrients, but then the ability to constantly absorb it and spoon feed them to your plants, but so to speak, have that constant availability. So, what else do we have here? The gut brain microbiome is really interesting. So, like I was stressing, the nutrient density for your food and for your garden crops, there's actually even a connection through the vagus nerve from your gut all the way up to your brain. And you would think that your brain is sterile, but it's actually, there's microbes up there. It's one more reason to eat well, eat a good diversity of fresh food that has this full complement of microbes so that you've got that good diversity in your gut and you don't have too much of one microbe totally dominating your system, going up, causing mental health and other issues. So, you are what you eat. It's really important. I did an organic farm for several years of my life. That was the best I've ever felt when I was eating the most organic, fresh produce possible. So, and that's another reason why frequent users are generally a little bit more healthy because they're also inoculating their microbiome with good stuff and also uh, stimulating their immune system in a positive way, not to overwhelm it, but just to stimulate it so that you stay strong. So, saving your soil is also a really nice tip. You can you can save soil and re-amend it with a little bit of lime to adjust the pH, and then add some of the bison brew in there to re-inoculate your good microbes. And it's a really good idea to reuse your soil. Cocoa and other things, same thing. You can take the cocoa and you can actually soak it in enzymes that will break down the excess salts and leach that off and reuse your cocoa because believe it or not, some of these things can actually improve with time as the microbial diversity builds up, as the quality builds up. So that's a really nice thing to do. And let's see. So this is kind of crazy, but the microbes we discussed, they're all over the plants. They're in the roots, the stems, the leaves. They're in the glandular trichomes, the just the normal plant hairs. They're in thorns and in cactus spines. But it's pretty wild. The plant will actually take some of the very best microbes and it will move them all the way up and get ready to deposit them in the seed coat itself. So the reason it does this is because as soon as the root pops out of the seed, it has that instant relationship with the exact microbes that it needs moving forward and that it needs to stimulate the immune system like we've been talking about. So this is incredible. It's very, very similar to when you are born, you need to be inoculated with your mother's microbiome to stimulate your immune system. Same exact thing here. So what we've done is we've created a product called Bison Seed Coat. And what it is we take our compost, our bison compost, sift it down to the fines, and then we mix it with calcium bentonite clay at the perfect ratio where we have it tested to where it's going to increase your germination rate by up to 20% or more. And it's also adding to faster growth. And that's how I know it's really, really working to stimulate the immune system. What it does is it's keying in on that technology where right away as soon as that primary root comes out, the radical, it needs to have that instant relationship with the best microbes possible. So the better you can do stimulating that, I know a lot of people have used azos in the past, use a little bit of mycos, things like that. You can still do that, do it with the bison seed coat as well, because the more diversity, the better. These plants, they're able to take the microbes that pair up well with them. So it's very similar to our cannabinoid boosters. The plant will take the precursor elements that line up the best with it. So basically, if you apply more of a wider group of microbes or a true shotgun approach, the more diversity, the better. That will exactly translate into a stronger, healthier plant. And we want to see that from the very get-go. And with everyone, well, not with everyone, but with so many people with a very, very high interest in seeds, we really wanted to accommodate that and cater to that niche. Now, the great thing about the product, even though we called it Bison Seed Coat, it's still extremely good for clones. So you do the same exact thing with clones. You want to get that relationship with the microbes, the diversity of microbes, as soon as possible. So you do a little dusting right before you put your clone down into your media, or dust the roots right before you go in, and that's going to give you that immune boost that you're looking for. The bison is loaded with humic acid, fulvic acid. It's a 1-1-1 for NPK, but it's really loaded with your secondaries and your trace elements as well. Let's see what we got. A few more questions, possibly. Yes, you can add, a tiny bit of IBA. You can add a lot of, hit them with recharge. All great things, great tips and good things to experiment with. The cool thing about grease is it runs as a great complement to whatever you're already doing. We've seen no incompatibilities across the board. The great thing is it's an all organic line, non-certified organic, but it's runs extremely clean and runs extremely well with synthetics too. So it can be the good product that will run clean with your hydroponic garden and boost specifically what you're going for, which is our resin production and ultimately our vital cannabinoids, terpenes, all those really good compounds that are produced by the glandular trichomes. That's what we're keying in on. And then we have some really supportive ancillary products. For example, the alpha grease. I created the Mammoth Pea product years ago. The alpha grease is basically like the Mammoth but without the microbes. So that's going to be providing the beneficial hormone tricantanol to increase that yield and keep driving that yield. We have the blue, which is going to be your strong antioxidant because they're realizing that all stress in the plant is oxidative stress. So that's going to be just an incredible product to take the edge off, deal with any extra stresses because we're trying to push these plants as hard as we possibly can. So we are, and in some cases, we're even purposefully adding on stresses, for example, drought stress, things of that nature to keep pushing the resin as well. So very important to aid in that. Our super grease, it's a lactobacillus strain, so we do have a beneficial bacteria. It's a lactobacillus. A lot of our guts are lactobacillus for our immune system. The plants are the same way. This bacteria, they call it the protectors because it really gets in there and it not only protects the plant, but it also helps all the other microbes that you already have established. So that's fantastic, and it's just an extra added insurance policy. Really seems to drive quality, drive the speed of growth. The OG grease is really helping with white ash, so it's helping deliver a super clean product, but allowing some of those trace elements to be in there to help the structure of the ash and the cleanliness of it. Most everything can get flushed out, no worries, no problem. And also because it's from the ocean, you don't have the heavy metal risk that you have associated with glacial rock dust or azomite. So you're able to get all those trace elements, but guaranteed to be safe within the parameters of heavy metal toxicity. So that's super important. Our grow and bloom, just overall quality boost, overall speed of growth, immune system. The cool thing is you're applying the micronutrients directly from the plant itself, so the bioavailability is through the roof, but then you're also providing the exact custom tailored biology for our plant. So that's extremely important and just a great one. You really can't go wrong. You can use the bison extract regularly, and then you could brew the bison brew once a week, or I'm sorry, once every 2 weeks, or top dress it like once every 2 weeks. So that's a great way to go. Let's see what else. Oh, biochar is an awesome product. I think that it's a great complement to pretty much any soil or cocoa. Um, if you can work it into other in another way as well, it's just such an awesome, powerful product and is such a great complement with strong teas and microbes because you're really giving them that much more of a home to live in, but then also a really nice steady, reliable source of carbon for the roots. So that's an underrated nutrient that people forget. Yes, the plant's pulling a heck of a lot of carbon out of the CO2, but when you can supplement that to the root system as well with biochar or similar types of humic acid products, that helps quite a bit. Vinegar can be a good product to get into the garden for mostly more for cleaning, I would say, as a good bio cleaner. Um, and that's kind of what they use it for in more Korean natural farming practices. They'll actually take some of their ferments and push them all the way to vinegar to make a great natural cleaning agent. Okay, nice. Yeah, I'll check into that. Thank you. Um, Looks legit or it looks really interesting. So, yeah, I'm always interested to try as many new things and get our hands on new technology and new ideas. I think that's how we keep progressing forward and it's just super important. Yeah, we definitely need to get a department of the USDA to be a regenerative agricultural a regenerative ag department with a focus on more um, applications in that regard. Foliar sprays, a lot of our products can be sprayed. In fact, pretty much all of them can. It's just our golden gun. We really only like to spray that in veg because it being a strong sulfur product, nano sulfur. We're worried about any type of residuals in flour with that one. But basically, we really highly recommend the foliar sprays because it's a quick way to get the availability right to your plant. And our compounds, all of our products, we really stress the bioavailability. So foliar is super important. For example, our cannabinoid boosters can even be sprayed with the lights on because they almost act as a sunscreen for the plant and a protectant in that way. So that's really exciting. And our cannabinoid boosters can also be sprayed in flower because they're all derived from the plant itself. So you're not spraying anything funky on there. So that's also extremely unique. There aren't many products that can have a IPM type effect that are truly safe to spray through the end up to harvest. And that would be our gold label, purple, amber, the green label, and also the yellow label, our finisher, which most people will layer on the finisher at the end because it helps with the maturation. We actually take it from crop that we push an extra 2 weeks to make sure it has all those finishing compounds on there. It's great to run in addition to the other cannabinoid booster that you're using. Like say you're running the gold, we'll run that gold and yellow for the last 2 weeks. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. And I'm going to try and post this as well on YouTube. And have an awesome day. Really appreciate you sticking with it and just rapping about plants with me because there's nothing more that I like to do. Peace. Have an awesome week.